I've been retired from the NYPD it's going to be 15 years next month. So I live out in Arizona. I'm a full-time martial arts guy. I like to train. I train every day. I teach
Nice.
4 days a week, and I do a lot of Zoom classes.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome back. It's another episode of Whistlekick Martial Arts Radio. Today I'm joined by Mike Calandra, and we're going to talk about who knows what. I've got some stuff here. I've got some ideas of where we might go, but I don't know yet because it hasn't happened. But if you're not new to the show, you know that we go all over the place. If you are new to the show, I would recommend that you check out two different places. Whistlekick.com is our online home. It's everything that we do, from this podcast to the events that we do, our apparel, our training programs, you name it, it's over there. Now, whistlekickmartialartsradio.com is our digital home for this show, the world's #1 traditional martial arts podcast. I roll my eyes at myself because nobody made me say that, but we're proud of what we do, even though, kind of tooting our own horn isn't something that comes easily to me. The team does a tremendous job, and if you want to go and find all the things that we're doing with the show, maybe sign up for the great newsletter that we do that gives you behind the scenes access to these episodes. whistlekickmartialartsradio.com. Now, this episode is sponsored by Kitaro. If you've been around a while, you know what Kitaro does. And they sent me this awesome autism awareness belt. And this belt, like all of their belts, made in the USA, available online at Kataro.com, Kataro.com. WK10 gets you 10% off. You can use your wholesale discount if you have a school to save 10% over there. And what else? What else do I want to tell you about that? You can find all belt and embroidery options in their theme belts category at Kataro.com. Thank you to Kataro for continuing to sponsor us and do all the cool stuff that you're doing over it. And without further ado, Mike, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
So as I was looking through, and maybe this isn't the best place for us to start, but it's where we're going to start because it's something that really struck me. When I look at your background and the styles that you've trained in, you led off your list with Isshin-Ryu, which was one of my original styles. Now, I've got to say, I haven't bumped into too many Isshin-Ryu people who've trained in all of these other things.
Okay.
That right, when we think about styles, there are certain styles that seem to attract people that train in that they do more cross training than others. And to my fellow Isshin-Ryu folks out there, I'm not disparaging you in any way. I just, when I meet Isshin-Ryu people, they tend to be locked in, lifelong Isshin-Ryuers. So what's the story here? How does this happen?
Well, I'm a lifelong Isshin-Ryu. I mean,
Okay.
recently, I was promoted to Judo by the present headmaster of the system, Kichiro Shimabuku. So I've been doing Isshin-Ryu since 1979. I've been with Sensei since 1979 in terms of being in that association.
Wow.
But early on, I really got into martial arts, and when I got into martial arts back then, the only books that were really available were the Don Draeger books.
Yeah.
So reading those books and seeing all these different arts that were out there, and me pretty quickly becoming totally, really becoming one of my main focuses at 15 of training in martial arts. My first instructor had also studied a style of jiu-jitsu, which he was not doing at the time, but I managed to go and train with one of his students and a student of someone else in New Jersey. And that was my first introduction to the Japanese Koryu, the ancient arts. I saw the original Shogun on TV, and I decided
Was that it? Was that did it
yeah,
for you?
well, that was the thing that set me on the path of Japanese swordsmanship.
Okay.
And at the time in New York, there wasn't a lot of Japanese swordsmanship.
No.
I saw
No,
no,
if we're talking late 70s, early
yeah,
80s. Yeah.
yeah. So I found one guy who was a student of a Japanese instructor. When I went to meet him, at the time I was 16 years old. I think maybe I was just turned 17. And even as a teenager, I just wasn't impressed with the guy. So I looked in the phone book and looked up his. Back then we actually had phone books, and I looked up the Japanese teacher's name, and he was listed, and I called him at his house. And he answered the phone, and I introduced myself, and I said what I wanted to do, and he said, "Oh,
We
okay."
hold on. I got to press pause there because
Yeah.
that's a thing that would never happen today, right?
Right.
To be that forward as a teenager
Right.
and so direct it coupled with the fact that it wasn't uncommon for people to look up a name in a phone book back then, right?
Right.
We haven't quite had that for about 15 years, 20 years, that people just go, oh, your name is here, so it must be acceptable. Because
Right.
to the kids out there, you could have your name removed from the phone book. So
Right.
we assumed if it was listed, it was okay to call you.
Well, the funny thing is obviously he was the only Otani Yoshitaro in the phone book. Right. I mean, how many of them were going to be in New York? And he was very nice when I spoke to him on the phone. He gave me a phone number to call so I could find out where the classes were.
Yeah.
And that started me in Japanese swordsmanship. So pretty early on, I was cross training.
Yeah.
That led me to Judo. And I just, again, in certain arts, Judo I did for a very, very long time. I traveled back and forth to Japan to test
Now, when
three
you
different
say Jodo,
occasions.
you mean Joe as in the stick.
The short stick
Joe.
versus the samurai
Yeah.
sword. Yeah, Shindo Musuru Jodo.
Okay.
And then jujitsu, I still train in karate. Obviously, I'm still teaching and training also.
Mhm.
And then that eventually led me to Chinese arts. And what led me to Chinese arts was I was training in Jodo in Japan, and one of the Jodo students was a senior teacher of Chinese martial arts.
Mm.
And he said, "Oh, we're doing a class on Saturday. You guys want to come?" And we said, "Sure." And so started exploring that. Actually, he came to New York for 10 days, taught at my school for 10 days. And then down the road, and I was introduced to Master Chen Zhanghua. And that started me on the path to Chen style Taijiquan practical method, of which I'm an indoor disciple. I've been doing that over 25 years. And eventually I met Lu Changyi, headmaster of feeding crane kung fu. And I've been training in that for, I'm not even sure now, 15 years, maybe a little more. I don't even know. I can't even keep track anymore. So I train in a lot of different martial arts. I'm a principle based practitioner instructor, meaning, principles over personalities for me.
Okay.
A lot of guys get hung up. Isshin-Ryu is a prime example. A lot of guys get hung up. They're in this particular teacher's camp. They're in that particular teacher's camp.
You said it, not me.
That teacher has, and it's not just Isshin-Ryu. It's all the
No,
different
no, it
styles.
is not.
It's every
But
style, right?
I understand what you're talking about.
Yeah. And I think that actually hurts them as practitioners, and I think it hurts the style because what you have is you have only one person's opinion on everything. And they buy into that cult of personality, and he's right on everything, and no one's right on everything,
No.
including me, including the founder of Isshin-Ryu. No one's right on everything. It's really incumbent upon us to look at principles and find those things that are correct in how to move and what to do, and that's what I'm pretty much devoted to. You know, so I'm not hung up on the personalities. I've trained with a lot of different people in Isshin-Ryu, a lot of Tatsuo students I've trained with.
Hmm.
I've trained with a few of the Okinawans. Uh, so that's what led me to all these different arts. And I love martial arts. I'd train in more if I could, but my wife would probably kill me because I'm already doing so many. I had the headmaster I was given a personal tour of the Aikido Hanbu dojo in Tokyo by Moriteru Ueshiba. And at the end, he said to me, "Please teach Aikido." And I looked at him and laughed. And I said, "Sensei, if I teach any more martial arts, my wife will kill me." And he laughed and he goes, "Oh, I understand." Because it's just you don't have enough time in the day to teach everything. In New York, I was teaching 6 arts. Out here in Arizona, I'm pretty much teaching 4.
When you were teaching six, were you teaching them independently?
They're all
This is
independent.
Isshin-Ryu class.
Yes,
This is okay.
all independent.
Okay.
So my Taiji master has said to me on more than one occasion, he's the only guy I've ever seen that can keep everything distinct and separate.
Hmm.
And
Where does that? So maybe I did accidentally start in a wonderful place because that is really unique. Here's why I say that. Most of the people that I know, when they start cross training, it is because they are intentionally looking for what does this art have that this art does not. So that even if I think of them, even if they are independent, my personal expression of martial arts is more complete. But I don't think I'm hearing you say that.
Yeah, I'm not saying that.
Okay.
So what I will say is most of the Isshin-Ryu karate that people are doing is not complete, but that's on them. That's not on Isshin-Ryu.
Mm,
It's the same with the other Okinawan karate styles. I was just in Okinawa in December, and I had this discussion, and I was asking people like James Pankowitz and Dan Anderson, who live there.
mm. Yep.
I said, so let me ask you
Yeah,
guys a
James is a great
question.
guy. He's been on the
Yeah,
show.
yeah. Let me ask you guys a question. Where's the emphasis on self-defense
Mm,
in Okinawa? And, James made the statement that, well, Okinawa is a very safe place. And I said, well, I understand that. But I said, Okinawans never travel. They never travel someplace where maybe it's not as safe, where maybe they may have to defend themselves.
right.
And I said, the founder of Isshin-Ryu had a knife defense curriculum. The founder of Isshin-Ryu had a ground fighting curriculum. And I said to them, so you guys live here. When's the last time you saw an Okinawan master teach knife defense or teach ground fighting? And they both look at each other. And what was the answer? The answer was never on
Right.
both cases. So again, it's not that the art is limited, it's that the representation of the art is
Mm,
limited. So, my first instructor, who was not a nice guy and not a good individual, I eventually had to left for a myriad of reasons, okay? But he was into self-defense. He did teach ground fighting. He taught knife defense. He taught gun disarms. So he did teach a lot of that stuff. Um, so again, no, I did not cross train because the first art I was studying I felt lacked something. I cross trained because I was looking for what these other arts brought to the table in terms of my personal self-defense journey. My sole being for starting martial arts was to learn how to fight. It was a violent incident involving my parents, with a gang of hoodlums in the little neighborhood we lived in, with the potential that they would then come after me. And I decided, well, I better learn how to fight. So I was a member of the local YMCA, signed up there, and it turned out that was Isshin-Ryu Karate. Had no idea what Isshin-Ryu was, didn't even know what karate was. Started training there, and I was hooked quick. And then
what hooked
so,
you?
well, what hooked me was I just liked the movement. I mean, I always bring it back to that. If you don't like the movement, you're not going to do something. If
Sure.
you're going to study a certain type of dancing and you don't like that movement, you're not going to do it. You're going to move on to
Makes sense.
something else. Um, so the movement, the training. I was young. I was 15 in an adult class. So most of the guys are in their 20s. Some are in their 30s and 40s. They're big guys. I'm a little guy. When I joined, I was 5'2", 125 pounds. Not that I'm a giant now. On a good day, I'm 5'7". But the point is these guys saw I was into it. So, they pushed me a little bit, which was good. And I really liked it. And again, that led me to jiu-jitsu. And, jiu-jitsu's emphasis is different. There's a lot more emphasis on, Kensetsu waza, joint locking and throwing techniques.
Mhm.
So there was that. Then Judo, again, a weapons art that I just liked. Ei-jitsu, Ei-do and Ei-jitsu. Again, I just love the sword, just enjoy it. So some of the arts I do is because I really enjoy them. And, to me, it always comes down to the physical movement. Can I perfect that physical movement? Which we all know we can't, but the goal is to try. So, yeah, so I didn't train in other arts because I thought Isshin-Ryu was lacking. And now I see doing all these different arts, I see there's common threads that go through all of them. Where I think a lot of people look for the differences and try to point out difference. Oh, you see, Isshin-Ryu does that. That's no good. Oh, you see that? Jiu-Jitsu does that. That's no good. I think the guys that do that miss the boat. I think you want to look for common threads that go through them. And the more common threads you find, I think your physical martial arts will become better.
Yeah. I also I and preaching to the choir here with our audience, but I have a really severe issue when people will say this person is doing this art and look how they're messing up, thus that art is deficient.
Right.
Right? It's all the videos online of, karate versus taekwondo, and I mean, forget the fact we're not even specifying which style of karate,
Right.
but why do we assume that person is the greatest implementation of that style, and thus if they don't do well, then it's the style's fault, right? That
Right.
to me it's like saying I had bad Mexican food once, so Mexican food is terrible.
Right. Right. Well, I demonstrated, I was in my Taiji masters school up in Canada, and there was another Taiji master there. And my master, Chen Zhanghua, says, hey, go demonstrate some karate. This is like
Mm,
25 years ago. He's demonstrate karate. And I said, listen, these are all Chinese martial artists. They don't want to see karate. I said, listen, he goes, come on, go out and do some karate. So I went out, I demonstrated Shinto. And, when I tell the story, I say, I did Shinto like my hair was on fire, meaning like I'm demonstrating in front of this high level master. I'm not going to nonchalant it. I put everything I had into it.
sure.
And he spoke no English. And when I finished, he brought a translator over and he said to me, he said, your Kung Fu is very strong.
Mm,
Right. And then he said, when you learn to relax, your true power will come out. And then he added, all things lead to the top of the mountain if done right. So again, right. And then, like people will knock some of the ancient Japanese arts, like the style of jujitsu I do, right, was founded in around 1650. It's a
mm,
samurai art, was only taught to samurai. So obviously there's techniques against the short sword where you're defending against the short sword and different types of attacks. And some people look at it and go, oh, that's not very practical, right? And then, the 12th headmaster was killed in the last samurai rebellion. So, one of the things I laugh at is these arts, these ancient arts coming out of Japan, it wasn't about scoring points. It was they were used in combat, life and death combat. So there's certain techniques we look at in modern times. It may not make sense to us, but I bet if we had a guy here from the 1600s living in that environment, when we said to him, hey, this technique seems a little weird to me. Why did you do this? I'm
mm.
sure when we heard him explain it, we'd be like, oh, okay, that makes complete sense. So again, I think sometimes it's like what we see now with in society. We apply a modern standard to some historical event that took place 100 years ago,
Yeah.
when you can't do that. And it's the same
Right.
thing in martial arts. So, like in my dojo, the ancient jujitsu techniques that I teach in the kata, right? Um, I update them in terms of when I teach self defense. So, you know,
Seems sensible.
right,
Why wouldn't you?
right, exactly. But so that's why I don't understand the knock sometimes that people have, and and
Well,
it's the same.
you
Yeah,
said something I want to go back to, and I think this is so. I think this is something that people forget, and you're hinting at it, and I want to make sure, we don't have to spend time here, and we could come back to it because I did sort of cut you off, and I apologize
that's right.
if it was too sharp of a cut.
No, no, no.
Uh, but you mentioned in Isshin-Ryu, there was knife curriculum, there
Right.
was ground curriculum, and when if those things are not there, one could make the assumption. I mean, you were a police officer. Would you not handle entry into a room differently with and without a vest, with and without a firearm? If you know you have ground curriculum versus you don't, you're going to operate differently. If you know how to defend against a knife versus you don't, you're going to operate differently. And if we take let's call it the stand-up empty-handed curriculum of Isshin-Ryu, and this what I'm saying applies equally to everything. If you remove these other pieces, it doesn't work as well. Mexican food without salsa and guacamole is a very different experience. You can still eat it, you can still evaluate it, it still provides nutrition, but if it wasn't designed to be prepared and served in that way, is it really fair to evaluate it as a complete standalone meal?
Well, karate especially has got a problem, and karate's problem is it's gone too far in one direction, which is the direction of sport.
Mm,
So it's painted itself into a corner, and I'm not sure they know how to get out of it. And again, that's okay if that's what you want, but what was its original intent? And it's like you use the food comparison. Okay. So if we're leaving out all these different aspects of karate, is it still karate? So, again, you look at Isshin-Ryu, and a lot of the senior dons in Isshin-Ryu could not do all the Isshin-Ryu kata if their life depended on it. Couldn't do it, right? And people say to me, well, that's a bold statement. Okay, right. And I've been judged at tournaments a long, long time ago where a guy left out a whole section of an Isshin-Ryu bow kata. I did the whole kata and he won. And then one of the senior dons, many of them eighth and ninth dons, came up to me and said, "Oh, your kata was really good." And I said, with all due respect, I said to the person, because they were a friend of mine, I said, "You don't know this kata." And they looked at me and I said, "Tell me you know this kata." And they said, "Yeah, I
Was it
couldn't
an
do the kata."
Isshin-Ryu tournament or
Yeah, it
was
was
it
an
an
Isshin-Ryu
open?
tournament. It was an
Okay.
Isshin-Ryu tournament.
So
Right,
theoretically, that mattered a
right,
lot.
right. So my
Should
thing
have anyway.
is again, if you're not focusing on the Kobudo, well, then you're not doing all of Isshin-Ryu. If you're not focusing on all the different aspects of Isshin-Ryu karate, well, then are you really doing the whole aspect of Isshin-Ryu karate? And again, take Isshin-Ryu out and plug in Goju-Ryu, Shorin-Ryu, Uichi-Ryu, plug in any art, all right?
Right.
My contention is when people pull into the parking lot, right? My dojo's at my house, so I have a separate building on my property, right? So when people pull into the parking lot, when they're getting out to come into class, I want them in their head saying, "Boy, I wonder what sensei's going to do tonight." Now, the first teacher I trained with, it was the same thing every night. It was the same pattern of the class. But my classes are dramatically different. I change them up every class. And I change up all different types of subjects, And you talk about the stand-up thing and everything. Yeah, I can tell you, having been in a lot of actual combat, that this fallacy of every fight goes to the ground. Yeah, if you put the opponent down there, that's my idea of the fight going to the ground. The fight's going to the ground where you're both on the ground rolling around. Yeah, that shouldn't be happening, especially if you're a trained fighter. But did it happen to me where I actually, for whatever reason, lost my balance, right, and wound up on the ground? Yeah, it did. Okay, so again, I posted a video on my channel last week of me showing some knife defense and explaining knife defense. And a guy commented, "Well, this is too dangerous, so I don't teach that." And my response to that guy would be, "Well, okay, so if you're an instructor in London, which right now has a massive
People
problem
do not understand the
with
level of
knives,
violence that exists in London right now
right?
and
And
has
right
for
now,
years, and it's getting worse.
Right. And right now in New York, you have a big comeback of knife attacks. Okay, so if you're not teaching any knife defense, then I'm sorry, you're not teaching self-defense. So, and you might say, "Well, it's very hard to fight a guy with a knife."
That's why
Yeah,
they use knives.
right, right. So the point is, though, is you're not going to give your students anything. You're not going to give them any chance. So I also just think it makes it for a more interesting study. I think you have more people that stick around longer. If it's, I think the study of life and death fighting is more interesting than the study of let's get in a car and go to a tournament next weekend and try to win a trophy. And I think for a lot of guys that hit a certain age, I think that idea of going to that tournament, not everyone's like that, but becomes not that important. And if that's what your school is, your main focus, I think you're going to lose a lot of people. I think when the focus is on when a guy attacks you like this, and people feel that confidence grow that they can actually defend themselves, I think that lends itself to acquiring and keeping students longer term. So
Do you teach kids?
I do.
Does your opinion on that change when you're thinking about younger versus older?
Yes. I teach kids completely different from adults.
Okay. How so?
So kids, for me, it's more about fun. The curriculum's the same. So in Isshin-Ryu, will I promote a kid to black belt? Yeah, if he's around enough years and he has the 10 kata he needs to have, and he can demonstrate bunkai and self-defense and all those things he needs to demonstrate.
If he knows the stuff, you don't have a
Right.
youth curriculum, adult
No,
curriculum, youth rank,
no.
adult rank.
No, we just had 4 teenagers test in the New York school last Saturday, as a matter of fact. I posted video up of them doing Seisan kata, and a lot of the comments were about the power. Wow, the power, right? So yeah. So, and again, do I say, "Oh, that kid's the equal of an adult black belt"? Absolutely not. So, but what I want is I want to get the kid to stick around long enough to get to my adult class. So in New York, the school, my dojo, just celebrated its 40th anniversary.
Oh, congratulations.
Thanks. So we've had kids that start with us at 4 or 5, and they stay with us till they go off to college. And the ones that come into the adult class, one of the first things I say is, wow, the adult classes are a lot different because now it's serious. I don't teach knife defense in kids' classes. I don't teach gun disarms in kids' classes. I don't teach choking techniques in kids' classes. So there's certain things I don't do. I do a lot of drills, a lot of pad work, a lot of flying kicks. I want the kids to be active, do different things. I want them I want to fool them into realizing they're learning karate. Switch to my adult class. The adult class is deadly serious. Will I teach jump kicks in adult class? Yeah, for athleticism. But also I'll also say, yeah, don't ever try this in a fight, right? So I have a dramatically different approach. And I had one of my contemporaries say to me in New York, you have so many adult students, they said to me. I teach adult classes, the guy goes, but I don't have a lot of adult students. And I looked at him and I said, well, you don't teach adult classes. And he said, yeah, I do. I have adult classes on the schedule. And I said, no, you don't. I said, you teach your adult classes using the same marketing strategies that you use to teach your children's classes. And I said, okay, but you're going to limit yourself because a lot of adults, that's not what they're interested in. Right. So yeah, I have a dramatically two-tiered approach as far as a kid's class and adult class. Very, very different. So.
Okay. My wheels are spinning on that, right? I'm thinking a lot about that. And I guess, did you start like that?
No.
Because you pointed out a lot of schools, the material is the same.
Right.
And they market it the same.
Right.
For a lot of them, the difference between the kids and the adults is simply the expectations.
Right.
Right. And I also grew up in a school where there was no youth rank.
Right.
It was, I earned my black belt at 16.
Right.
Because I was able to do the adult things in what they said was an adult way.
Right.
So if you didn't start out that way, what was it that made you change your mind and start to do it that way?
So I went to Okinawa in 1991 and I walked in and there were kids that were probably, again, sometimes it's hard to tell. They're probably 11, 12-year-olds wearing black belts. And I was floored. And I said to Master Shimabuku, I said, Sensei, you promote kids to black belt? And he made a face at me and he went, yes. And so later that night after class, we were out to dinner and I asked him, I said, Sensei, you promote kids to black belt? He says, yeah, if they have the requirements, I'll promote them. I said, but they're not as strong as an adult. And he goes, no, they're not. They're different. And then, the first school I was in, no woman had ever made black belt and no woman stuck around. So I asked him about women training and his response was, well, they're different. But my first instructor always said a woman had to be as strong as a man. Okay, so that means no woman's ever getting promoted unless you get that rare woman that's going to power lift and then train in the dojo, right? So he says, no, it's different. And I said, and then I said, well, what about if a guy's older and he joins? Like, what if a guy's in his 60s and he joined? He goes, oh, it's different. So he opened my eyes to the fact that, and again, I think a lot of my traditional martial arts friends miss out on this. And that's why most of them have closed their schools. Is because they're so stuck in a certain mindset. Well, a 10-year-old will never make black belt in my school. Well, if the 10-year-old starts at 4 and by 10, he's got the 10 Isshin-Ryu kata and he can demonstrate everything and he moves really, really well. Okay, yeah, he's not an adult black belt. But again, with all due respect, not all black belts are created equal. I mean, I go all over the place and I see Shodans and Isshin-Ryu that wouldn't be green belts in my dojo. And then I see Shodans and Isshin-Ryu where I look at him and go, how long are you training? And when a guy tells me and I go, you're only a Shodan? And he goes, yeah. And I go, well, okay, again, that instructor's holding the guy back. So a lot of my traditional friends say, oh, I'll never promote a child to black belt. And my first instructor said, once you make Nikyu as a kid, you can't get promoted till you're 16. Okay, so every 11 or 12-year-old that made Nikyu.
And for folks out there, that's second degree brown.
Yeah. So every kid that made Nikyu, guess what they did?
They quit.
So all these different experiences made me have to change my idea. And, again, my idea is what I'll say is I see most martial arts schools where the Shodans look incredibly sharp.
Hmm.
And then I see a little bit of a decline as they go up in dans. And then, the standard joke in my dojo, my students would always say to me, well, you'll never make eighth dan. And the first time they said to me, I said, well, why do you say that? They say, because you're not fat enough. Right. And, so it's
Have you
right.
seen the shirt? That like the graphic. I've seen it on a shirt,
Oh, yeah.
and
Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it shows the waistline increases, the rank increases.
Yeah. So, the thing is, you know, in my dojo, you look if you, like obviously not Arizona because I've only been out here a couple of years. I have one black belt from another Isshin-Ryu school that trains with me,
Hmm.
but everybody else are beginners. But in New York school, we have eighth dans. Okay,
Hmm.
so right, so again, you walk in that school, there's no stripes on black belts. Everyone just wears a black belt, right?
Yeah.
I don't wear my red belt when I teach classes. I wear a black belt. The only time you'll see me wear a red belt, maybe a seminar, a promotion. All right.
Right.
But you go in the New York school, there's 10 black belts on the floor. If you're a beginner,
Hmm.
you learn within 2 nights who the senior guys are.
Yeah.
Like there's a huge difference in the New York school between the ability of the eighth, seventh, and sixth dans and the Shodans. Right.
And there
And
should be.
yeah, and there should be, but the problem is in most places that's not the case. And then the other issue I have is a guy like myself. So I'm promoted to Judan, 10th Dan by the headmaster of Isshin-Ryu himself. Okay, which again, I was like, okay, great. But when I went to Okinawa, they were explaining to me how to them it was a very big deal, and these weren't Isshin-Ryu people; these were other styles, right? And you know, my philosophy is, well, if I'm a 10th dan, then I better have at least one eighth dan in my dojo. I better have a seventh, a sixth, I better have fifth dans. Because if I'm a 10th dan and the next highest ranked black belt in my dojo is a go dan, um, I think there's probably a problem. And
Hmm.
I think that problem is probably me. My ego saying, well, I don't want anybody to get too close to me. And I see that a lot. And that's
It's
another huge problem.
this is obviously we don't want to name names. We don't want to do anything, say anything that's disrespectful here. But can you unpack that subject for a moment? Because I think there are a lot of people out there, especially if they are younger ranks, that may not understand. You just said it so succinctly. There are some people out there who may not fully understand what you're saying.
So let me put it this way. So first off, the whole rank thing, I'm not a huge fan of. So in
Yeah,
Taiji and feeding crane, there is no rank. You find out when you work out with someone who's
right.
who, right? Um, so and rank is the easiest thing to get in the world. Okay, if you really want it, you know, believe me, you can get it. All right. Um, my thing is so rank is for me. I promote my students, and I'm saying to them, I appreciate the hard work you're putting in. Um, you know, it's great. Keep up the good work. All right. But like I tell people, the hundreds of times people tried to kill me when I was a police officer, no one ever before they attacked me asked me what rank I was. And I jokingly said, on a few occasions, it probably would have been better if I took the frame certificate and maybe smashed it over the criminal's head. That'd be better use for it than it hanging up on the wall.
Yeah.
So that's one thing we need to understand. And I know you've seen it, I've seen it, whereas person goes up in grade, they get this idea that enables them to treat those beneath them in a way that I think is utterly ridiculous.
Hmm.
Unless you're paying my mortgage, right? So again, I think it's important. My philosophy within my own dojo is, well, if I get promoted, then I want to promote my students. I mean, my teacher has shown in Okinawa that obviously, like I tell people, when I started at 15, if you ever told me I would be promoted to 10th Dan by the headmaster of the art, I would have told you were what?
Crazy.
Yeah,
You're nuts.
like crazy, right?
Might have
Um,
thrown some expletives in there as a New
right,
Yorker.
right. But my thing is as I got promoted, I always would look at the time and grade for all my black belts underneath me. And I'd look and say, okay, well, who's got the time and this and that, and I'd always look to promote them, and I'm always doing that. Every year before I go to New York, I pull out their copies of their forms that have their time and grade on
Mhm.
it. And I look and see when's the last time I promoted one of the black belts. And I say to myself, okay, is it time for this guy to get promoted? Um, so, so I think rank can be used as a good tool if it's used properly. If it's used as a weapon, it creates a huge problem in the dojo. Like I've had friends of mine that say they were promoted based on loyalty, based on this, based on that. And again, maybe if you're getting promoted to one of the higher dan grades based on loyalty, can definitely have be a factor. But if it's a lower dan grade, I think it's more ability should be the prime factor.
Yeah.
And again, that all has to be relevant, right? If a guy has a bad leg, if a guy has this, if a guy's older, you can't expect him to move like the 20-something-year-old.
Yeah.
So, I think rank should be a very individualized thing. I don't
I
think a
I agree.
person should be compared to the black belt next to them. You got to look at them and say, well, how much better has this guy gotten since the last time he got promoted? And so that's my approach to rank.
It,
Um,
we agree. I mean, we're
yeah,
overlapping at least 90%, if not
yeah,
more. And for me, what sent me on this journey thinking about it was the realization that we do not demote people as their skills fade.
right,
So
right,
if that is true,
right,
then rank is not entirely about skill. It's about a
right,
personal, individualized journey.
right,
And if you go to look at most schools, if you say, "Hey, I'm in a wheelchair. I can't use my legs. Can I come train?" Yes. Can I earn rank? Yes. Okay. Most schools have kicking in their curriculum. If I can't kick, but I can still earn rank, then that tells me that is not a hard line standard. That it's about my journey and what I'm able to do, right? And so for me, that's led me to when I opened my school, which is you know coming up on 2 years old, a year and a half old, we laid out rank very simply but definitively in a way to help people understand here's what you should be focused on right now.
right,
Not not to say that, we don't even have time in grade as a requirement. It's if you can do these things in whatever way is sensible for you on your journey, right? Like we have obviously if we're going to allow people in a wheelchair, just as a counterexample, to train and earn rank, there has to be some way that that standard applies to them that needs to apply to everyone else, or it's not a standard.
right. The standard should be, and it has to fall somewhere between there. So, I have a special needs student training right now. He's 26 years old. It's probably at the age level of 8 or 10, maybe even lower.
Sure.
He's not doesn't really speak much. Big, big guy. Um, and a lot of times the class, if there's an even amount, I'll always pair off with him. So I pair off with him in the class. And I'm sure a lot of people would say, you know, you're so senior, you're pairing off with the special needs guy. And I'm like, well, yeah, And a couple of weeks ago, we had so many people sick out here that he was the only guy that showed up for class for 4 nights in a row. And I worked with him every night. I mean, that's my job. My job
Yeah.
is I'm the sensei. I don't stand up there with my hands on my hips like Superman, directing everybody else to work with people. I mean, my job is to train people. So I
Mm.
still pair off with people, whether they're a white belt, green belt, brown belt, black belt. Um, that's the job. That's the function. I think a
Mm.
lot of guys, as they go up higher in rank, that kind of falls by the wayside. I think they lose that love for the physical training and get all wrapped up in the BS of the supposed rank, which puts you on this supposed pedestal, you know?
Here's my theory on it, and I genuinely am curious if you agree. I think for a lot of them, and I call them the thumbs in belts crowd,
Right.
because you often see them on the sidelines and their thumbs are tucked in their belts and they're observing because they're not training. I think it's fear. I think they reach a certain point where a lot of them realize my skill now is not what it was. And I'm so afraid of looking inferior that I'd rather not demonstrate. I'll have my high ranks demonstrate. I'm going to still pick it apart, which I think comes across a bit dickish at times, all times. I'm going to pick it apart. I'm not going to show you. And I just want you to believe that I can still do it and I can still do it better than everyone else, but nobody's going to see it.
So one of the issues I think is going on, and on my own podcast, the Martial Truth podcast, I did a one where karate needs an intervention, but you can plug in a lot of arts for that.
Sure, sure.
So I asked the senior Shotokan sensei one time, I said, who studies other arts with me, I said, let me ask you a question. A lot of your first generation Shotokan sensei in Japan have gotten hip and knee replacement. And he said, yeah. And I said, okay, so why is that? I said, so I'm practicing Isshin-Ryu going to be 46 years and I'm good. I don't have any issues, right? Now, there are some other Isshin-Ryu people that have had problems, right? But I would say it's because they're training wrong. And, that's one of the things that I've tried to figure out is when you talk about principles and high level body mechanics, right? Okay, so if we move correctly, then we shouldn't be injuring the body.
Completely agree.
Okay, so again, I think this is a huge problem. And I think the problem becomes, well, I said to him, so why won't a senior Shotokan sensei raise his hand and say, hey, we have all these, older sensei that get all these body problems. Should we take a look at this? And the answer is no, because in Japan, the protruding nail gets hammered down. And the other thing is, well, no, so-and-so said to do it like this.
This is how it's always been done. We can't change it.
So my question is, well, if so-and-so was wrong, well, then what, right? So my thing is I was asked in Okinawa when I was there, some of them said to me, and these were guys from various Okinawan styles, they said to me, you don't move like the other Isshin-Ryu guys. And they said, is that because of some of the other arts you study? I said, well, obviously that has to affect it. But what it is I'm looking to move in a high level way where I can generate the maximum speed and power I can and not hurt my body. So, I'm still out here doing all kinds of crazy stuff, jump, spinning, back kicks on the heavy bag. I'm going to be 62 years old. So the thing is again, if you train properly, you don't cause your body injury, and even in the New York school, we have guys in their mid 70s training. The guy that trains here, there's two people here in Arizona that train me, 172, 170. I mean,
What are those things? And I'm not going to go so far as to say improperly. I think I'm hearing you use that word. But what are some of the changes you've made or the differences that you see, the things you might recommend people do that are creating those injuries? Are we talking about, I'm assuming, if we're talking joint replacement, we're talking knees and hips. So we're talking about stances, right?
yeah. So in Chen style Taiji, there's a rule, and this rule applies to all martial arts. The knees are not allowed to move side to side. If the knees move
Not
side
how
to
they're
side,
built.
yeah, if the knees move side to side, you're going to cause eventual injury. And in feeding crane kung fu, one of the main things is do not do anything that causes the body injury. And if the body does get injured, do not train again until the body's healed. That's one of the things we say in feeding crane kung fu. Okay. I've never heard anything like that said in karate, right? Push through it.
Just the opposite. Yeah, exactly.
Do tough, right? Okay. I think the way some people kick, I had Bill Wallace stop in my dojo, just walk in out of the blue. So he liked my dojo. He says, oh, I trained in Okinawan karate with Eizo Shimabuku when I was on Okinawa. I said, yeah. I said, I'm aware of that. He says, yeah, your dojo is really nice. I really like the way, it's the New York school. And I said, hey, let me ask you a question. All these years, is there anything you would do different now that you're a little older? And he says, I would never throw a side kick above my waist. So again, I think the way we're moving, I think some of the things we do and the way we move causes injury. And again, you don't feel it initially when you're young, but when you're old, now those things start to pop up.
Yeah.
So,
And I want to support something that you've said there. So I have rank. under Bill Wallace. Actually, I'm recording this. My mother's Superfoot certificate is, I don't know
Okay.
if you can hear that. It's right there. Um, and so I love kicking. I love kicking high. It's
Right.
super fun. Biomechanically, the body is not built to kick much above the waist.
Right.
It's a dramatic compromise on anatomy.
So the only two kicks we do above the waist in Shen style Taiji are what we'd call a wheel kick or a crescent kick, and what they call a
Hmm.
tornado kick. And if you look at the hip joint, that's totally normal for the hip joint because it's a ball and socket, so it can move around,
Sure.
right?
But I imagine there's also a strong degree of lean as you do that, which creates some of the height.
Actually, no,
You're
no.
perfectly
So the
upright
foot
when you
comes
do
up.
that?
Yeah. So so
Okay.
when you trained in Isshin-Ryu, did you get up to Kusanku?
Yeah, yeah, my
Okay,
favorite
so
kata.
you know where we do the crescent kick and you do
Yeah.
the crescent kick into the jump. So
Yep.
yeah, if you look at that when we do that kick, that's the kind of kick I'm talking about. And in
Okay.
Isshin-Ryu, we're not leaning over when we do that. And again,
Okay. Right.
those kicks I'm doing for forever, I don't have any hip issues at all. I don't have
Sure.
any hip issues, zero. Um, you know, so again, I got to say, okay, well, why don't I have hip issues? Well, I think because my mechanics are good. You know,
Mm.
my son was a professional baseball player. He made it up to
Oh,
double A.
cool.
So, and he would talk about mechanics of doing things. And he'd like point out a pitcher and he'd watch his mechanics, and he was a catcher.
Mm.
And he'd say, this guy's going to hurt his arm. Okay, so if we apply it to other physical activities, why aren't we applying it to martial arts?
Because that's the way we've always done it.
Right. Because we're tough guys.
Right.
So yeah, so that's one of the things I'm talking about in terms of that,
Okay. That makes sense.
And again, when you're in, like, I've been in a lot of real fights, and when you're in a lot of real fights, I jokingly say to people, I'll wake up in the morning and I'll get up out of bed and my back will be a little sore, and I'll say initially I might say to myself, oh, what did I do yesterday? But then if I realize, well, I really didn't do anything yesterday, and you take a criminal down to the ground, you don't realize you go down harder on your knee than you thought, you move a certain way, and again, but like I tell people, those things were in the performance of a duty to protect people, to catch criminals.
Mm.
I'm not interested in getting hurt in a tournament. Like, that's just not something I want to do. I
Sure.
don't want to get hurt in my dojo. I want to be able to train. I want to be able to train when I'm in my 80s. Yesterday a video popped up of our Arsenio Winkler in Isshin-Ryu. He's 87 years old. And he was demonstrating techniques from the other day, from a couple of days ago. It's impressive as hell. He's 87 years old. He's in really good physical shape, which helps. And I've seen other people do that. And, that's what I want to do. And I look at a lot of my contemporaries and who've let themselves go, or because they never adjusted the training. This is another aspect of the problem. They're 17-year-old Marines training like lunatics in Okinawa. They come back, that's the only way they know how to train. And as they get older, they keep trying to train like that. Now they get injured, and now they just can't do it anymore. So when I was in Okinawa, I asked Master Shimabuku, and actually I'll even mention this, in Jiu-Jitsu, Shitama Manzo, the headmaster of Jiu-Jitsu, I asked him about, what about an older guy if he wants to do Jiu-Jitsu? He goes, oh, old man falls. And I looked at him and I said, what are old man falls? So he showed me. And I was like, oh, so like even my dojo in New York, which had a lot of the guys that senior guys in jiu-jitsu are in their 60s, the mid 60s, some of them will still take the big falls, but a lot of them, I've told them, I said, well, you've got to transition to the old man falls. You want to preserve the body and be able to train as long as possible. So I think that's another aspect that we've kind of missed the boat on in the States. A lot of these first generation guys across the board in whatever martial art they studied over there, they come back, they're 20-year-old guys.
Right.
They only learn that young way to train. They were never taught the older way to train. And I was lucky. I went the first time to Japan. I think I was 29 the first time I went. And I don't know why. I guess I just lucked out in that I asked those questions. And I have to be honest, I was surprised at the answer, which was, oh no, you have to adjust the training. You have to adjust the training. And yeah, so I think because a lot of those guys didn't know that, that's why they're suffering from a lot of these injuries they have now that are kind of permanent. you know?
Makes all kinds of sense. And I think we're finally, you're not the only one talking about this. I'm not the only one talking
Right,
about this. A
right.
lot of us are finally realizing, okay, if this continues to happen, it suggests that, excuse me, there is a problem. If enough people point out the problem, we can look for a solution to the problem. Maybe we don't all agree on the solution, but at
Right.
least the problem being exposed can lead to a solution rather than just, well, grit it out until you're not willing to do that and then stop, which is
Yeah.
is a silly thing.
Yeah, and I'm not against sport karate or sport martial arts. It's not for me, but if that brings somebody joy, I'm all for it.
Right.
Enjoy yourself. If that's what you want to do, whatever age you are,
Hmm.
God bless you. It's not for me. Um, you know, and my only thing is you can do the sport, but then, just understand you're missing a lot of components of what real karate was.
Mm,
And maybe have some type of balance where you do both. And I think if people would do that more, you'd see a lot more older students in the dojo sticking around for a long, long time. You
I
know.
agree. Now you've mentioned a couple times you have a show. Tell us about your show.
So I started this podcast. I just did my 101st episode the other
Oh,
day, the
that's
Martial
awesome.
Truth podcast.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
Martial Truth. Nice.
I have almost 17,000 subscribers on YouTube. I have about 140 channel members. The channel has over 1,700 martial arts videos on it.
Oh wow.
So it's a pretty big
Yeah.
channel.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff there.
Yeah, it's got a wide range of. I mean, you can maybe not everything, but you'll find videos on almost all martial arts. So it's not just
Mm,
Isshin-Ryu.
mhm,
I do a lot of videos. I have a series I'm doing on the principles of the martial arts. So I'll do, videos on Mariyoshi Kobudo, Isshin-Ryu, Chen style, feeding crane, across the board. I'll do videos on stuff. And then I do interviews like you're interviewing me. My 101st one was Sensei Marilyn Fierro from Long Island, who's a
mhm.
senior practitioner of Isshin-Ryu Karate. I've had Pat McCarthy on a couple of times. I try to interview a certain type of person.
Mhm.
I've also had a lot of the authors on to talk their books. I know the channel again. When you have almost 17,000 subscribers, it helps because they are selling books. Like someone,
Sure.
as soon as Marilyn Fierro came on the other day, someone immediately reached out to me, said I ordered both books.
Nice.
I don't care about the channel growing. So what I mean by that is I'm now at the point because the channel's gotten big, I'm getting reached out to people that want to help me make the channel bigger.
Mm,
I want it to grow organically. I've been retired from the NYPD for it's going to be 15 years next month. So I live out in Arizona. I'm a full-time martial arts guy. I like to train. I train every day. I teach
nice.
4 days a week, and I do a lot of Zoom classes. So I'm literally teaching 7 days a week when you include the Zoom classes. So I interview who I want to interview, who I want to talk to and find interesting. So like next week, I'm interviewing a martial artist from New Zealand who does
Oh,
Maori martial arts.
cool.
And this week, I'm interviewing Yannick Schultz again because he just got back from a research trip to Okinawa in Japan. So he wants to talk about some of the things he was researching and stuff.
Nice.
So and then it's the channel's a combination of me teaching things, a lot of historic video. I was the first person to put video of Don Drager up on
Mm,
YouTube. Last year, Macaron Sensei just passed away. Terry Macaron, senior sensei of Shorin-ryu in New York. He reached out. I know him again since I'm 15. He reached out and said, "Hey, I've got an old 8mm reel of Shoshin Nagamini's first visit to New York. I want you to take it and put it on the channel." So I did that. So the channel's been initially it started as I had about 200 VHS tapes that had all different martial arts stuff on it.
cool.
And I said, what am I going to do with this? And then I started transferring it and I started the channel. And then I put the Drager video up and someone contacted me from Japan and said, oh my God, we showed it to Kaminoda Sensei. He remembers filming that in 1970. He'd never seen it. Could you please send him a copy? So in terms of that, the channel's been incredibly rewarding,
That
meaning
sounds great.
like I get messages and emails from people that say, "Oh my God, I never saw my teacher's teacher do anything. And I came across your channel and you have video of them up there doing a kata." And, I don't remember the video necessarily, right? Because it's not necessarily even Isshin-Ryu, but it's those kinds of things that keep me going with the channel. I've cut back a little bit. I was putting a video up every day, but it just becomes
Wow,
where,
it's a lot of work.
yeah. So now I'm doing a few videos a week. I do one podcast a week. And yeah, I like it. I mean, it's called the Martial Truth Podcast.
We'll make sure we get it linked in the show notes for everybody.
Yeah. And yeah, so that's, like I said, started as a goof. One of my first partners, police partner, suggested me do it. I had never even thought about doing a podcast. And then slowly but surely I came up with some ideas and I came up with the name and I said, all right, I'm going to give it a shot. I did the first one, which was, who are you training to fight?
Hmm.
Which basically the subject was, are you training to fight another martial arts guy, or are you training to fight society's predators who have their own types of techniques and their
Good
own
question.
ways? And that's was the first subject. And then I went off from there. So sometimes it's just me sitting for 25 minutes or 30 minutes talking about a subject. And other times I'm interviewing people, and sometimes I talk and then I'll get up and demonstrate some stuff. So it all depends on what I feel like doing. So
Awesome.
And then people suggest, and now I've got people reaching out for me, asking me if they can come on the podcast. And, frankly, some people I'm not interested in, other people I'm very interested in. I was a little taken aback going to Okinawa and realizing the reach of the podcast. And
Nice.
then
That's great.
other senior martial arts people, letting me know they're big fans of the podcast. They watch it all the time. I was like, okay, so I guess this is reaching more people than I thought. So yeah, so I'm having fun with it. That's my main thing.
Good.
And I talk to people that I'm interested in talking to. Like, meaning I think I can learn something from. Like, I can't wait to interview the Mori martial arts guy, because that's totally out of my wheelhouse.
Yeah, I don't. That'll be interesting. I don't know
Right.
anybody that's
Right.
trained in that.
So it's similar. I think it's probably similar to Lua, which is a Hawaiian martial art.
Okay.
Which
That would make sense.
I did a seminar in that a couple of years ago, so I found it very interesting. So yeah, I think I'm going to I haven't interviewed somebody from Filipino martial arts yet, but I have someone in mind that I think I want to sit and talk to. So
Some great
yeah,
folks
so
out there.
I'm interested in not just like Isshin-Ryu and Mariyoshi Kobudo and Chen style the arts I do. I'm interested in talking to people from all different arts. I say all the time, I think there's enough students for all of us.
I wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah.
And again, yeah, we're going to link this in the show notes and your social media and everything. So I hope folks
appreciate
will
it.
check out what you're doing, because I think I suspect there's enough overlap in philosophy and approach that people would dig what you do. And I've said this all the time. If you find a show that you like better than what we do, prioritize that show, right? Because the whole reason we started this show was to create engagement and conversation and build retention in the arts. And I am not selfish at all. Heck, the only reason this show exists is because we couldn't get the existing shows at the time to take our money. So I made a show. So that's why we bring other people with shows on. It's there's more than enough room out here for all of us doing cool stuff. And just like in our training, as we get better, we help each other get better.
Right.
Directly and indirectly. And I think that's awesome. And just as I'm going to have you close in a minute, Mike.
Okay.
But for those of you out there, yeah, please check all this stuff out. Check out whistlekick.com. Check out whistlekickmartialartsradio.com, because that's why we're able to do the things that we do. Check out Kataro, Kataaro.com. Use the code WK10, capital letters, for this belt, the autism belt, or any of the other things that they've got going, all made in the States here. And they do wholesale accounts. So just check it. Thank you. Thank you to Kataro. Thank you to all of you. And thank you to you, Mike. How do you want to close today? What are your words to the audience as we wrap?
Well, I just think martial arts offers a lot of benefits to people. I think it's an interesting subject that you can come at from a lot of different angles. I think the health benefits are great if the movement's done correctly. So, just explore that, dig deep into that. If you're an instructor, especially, don't be too close minded. Open your mind to other arts. I'm not saying you have to train deeply in a lot of arts like I have, but even sometimes going to a seminar in an art might make you think about something that you hadn't thought about before. So, be open minded and enjoy the ride.